folks. We're here for another feedback episode. I know we said we'd do less of these, but we're still doing a few of them. And boy, you guys definitely had a lot of feedback for our last episode with Mariia. That was a real fun time. That was an absolute pleasure talking to her and learning from her and all of her studies. And yeah, many of you written in and a lot of great questions and just a lot of people appreciating the fact that she did her study in the first place and took the time to get to know us and she know us quite well, probably almost better than we know ourselves in some ways.
Yeah, it's a little creepy.
Yeah, no, she did a fantastic job. So, Mariia, if you're listening, thank you once again. That was an absolute treat. But
for sure.
Before we get to all of her feedback, just quickly maybe touch on we did an episode with Jeff Morris on apologetics, which a lot of people said they enjoyed that one as well too.
Yeah, super fun to do. I really love doing the research for that one too. Going ahead of time and actually learning all this stuff. And we definitely the feedback that we got, given there was not a lot of questions because it's hard to ask questions unless you're studying the stuff.
You have to take an hour to send in a question.
Oh, really?
It's thick stuff.
Yes, but people really appreciated the depth of it, and then also just opening their mind to a new way of looking at actually proving your faith or coming close to it or whatever. So, but yeah, it was awesome. So yeah, just seeing from first principles, all the natural theology stuff that he talked about and the different arguments and going all through all that. So people really appreciated that. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. If you haven't listened to that one, recommend definitely go back and listen to that one. That was a lot of fun to do too.
Definitely. And if you got more questions, if you want to send them in later, send them in and we can flip them over to Jeff and he can have at them if they're pretty detailed, which I would think they would be if you're sending in feedback on that episode. But without further ado, we should probably move on to the feedback from Mariia's because there was some really good questions and Mariia took the time to send in some answers, so we should definitely do them justice and kind of work through them. So
this is super unique because it was a total outsider. We had never talked to Mariia before this, obviously, and most people that listen were like, "Where did you find Mariia?"
Out of the blue.
Okay, fair enough. And then, but she's been so responsive. So she's been great, just responding to our questions and then trying to be really clear with the angles that she came at everything from, and really fair, really methodical. So it was really good.
For sure. So I guess the big one a lot of you want to know, when and where can you read her manuscript and everything she's written?
We're all excited to.
Yeah. So basically the short answer is not yet. It could take a couple months. It's still under review at the University of Ottawa, but it will be available for free to everybody. Mm-hmm. There's no embargo on it or anything like that. And Mariia is going to contact us once it's out, and we will definitely share it across our network.
Yeah, we'll definitely send it around, and hopefully, this in the back of my head, I'm thinking we should get Mike or somebody to audio record it, and we'll just throw it on the pod so people can listen to it.
That would be interesting. Yeah, we could
so
talk
that we
about
don't
that.
Not everyone's got to sit down and read it. And we can listen to it in our cars.
Yeah, fair enough. That would be quite useful.
Because I think it's going to be super useful. I'm really excited to see the engagement that it gets from some of the, maybe from our college or from some of the ministers in our churches. See how useful of a resource this is going to end up being. So, because when we read through, what did we get? Mariia sent us she didn't send us the whole thing, but she sent us her methodology. Yeah. Yeah. So the whole, how she went about it, chapter, and then a couple other ones, but mostly abstract and stuff. So we got a good gist for it before we did that episode.
Yeah.
But the methodology chapter, we read through that front to back, and that was 8 pages, 9 pages or something crazy. And the amount of detailed thought that goes into a study like that, because it's not a quantitative study, it's a qualitative study, interpreting what someone's saying. Yeah. The amount of study that goes into actually how to, keep everything anonymous and also how to analyze, who's saying what and what is actually the truth. It's really fascinating. So, I definitely appreciate all her, her being thorough on that so that it becomes a good resource for us. So,
yeah. Okay, so maybe moving on to the next question here that we got. What blind or weak spots does the Cairns Church have that we could address? So Mariia wrote back and kind of answered this one as well. So I'll kind of summarize, otherwise we'll be here all day if I read everything she read.
Yeah, you say it.
She is nothing if not thorough.
Yeah.
So basically she says she studied the school system and not our church specifically, although of course she had to do a tremendous amount of research into the Canarsie churches to do the study on the school system. But yeah, basically she said she referred to she referred to the teachings that took place. And she said, I did not question or comment on any of the practices or approaches, rather just describe them to provide the reader with a clear understanding of what these churches teach and what they teach in their schools as well. So
yeah, it's a rather like academic approach to the material, not, interpreting it or saying,
trying to just present the bare facts.
Yeah.
Like, here's what they say on sex ed or gay straight alliances or any sort of other hot button issues that might be taught and whatnot. So at the same time, she also says she distinguished between the Federation of Canadian and American Reformed Churches and the theology associated with that and the teachings, and then individual local Canadian Reformed churches. Because there's a fair amount of diversity amongst different local churches within the Federation on anything from, types of music and instruments or women voting and congregational elections, types of mission efforts, local and abroad, even just volunteering. Do you do more stuff in community or more stuff in the church, that kind of thing too. So lots of different approaches that people take, and there's a wide variety of opinions and views on that, just within even the Canarsie Federation.
Yeah, so it's pretty important because then, she distinguished the Federation itself as a whole and what the beliefs may be inside the Federation from the local church. So she said that like the interviewees could be necessarily shaped by the local church that they were in and not necessarily by the Federation's, instantiated views per se.
And people recognize that too. She found that people would refer to, those people over in the X church do this
Which I'm
way.
sure was like a very open conversation, eh? Like, since it was anonymous, everyone's like,
I'm going to vent.
Maybe getting some things off their chest or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's like, it actually gives a good picture of maybe what's alive or like the differences between the specific local churches. So
yeah, so basically to summarize this, I guess she kind of hesitates to give a solid answer just because she doesn't feel it's her place to say. But her general impression is there is a wide variety of approaches just within the Federation itself. And to, again, like those issues I mentioned, right? Different churches do different things differently.
And then she mentioned it was going to that kind of shapes the education in the schools in those areas. Yep. So I guess where that comes to a front would be like a school like Keto where you're bringing everyone in, and then like an elementary school could be a lot different. From Hamilton to deep Niagara, we'll call it Dunville or whatever. Attercliff, that would be the school.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, again, pretty academic way of looking at it, but.
We'll get into some juicier stuff later. Don't worry. Yeah.
That's a good thing for her because now we can, just speaking from a member of our community, we can actually take this seriously as a point of research, right?
Yeah. So, totally. All right. Next question here. I'll probably just read most of this question. So it's pretty well worded. Mariia focused almost exclusively on the Canarsie denomination, although she talked about the CRC a bit and mentioned the URC in passing a couple times. This person writes in saying they have many connections within the Canarsie, but currently attend a URC church. Are Mariia's findings specific to the Canarsie or generally applicable to other Orthodox Reformed denominations? Did she come to any conclusions about how these denominations are culturally different and or similar to each other? And do these various Orthodox Reformed denominations work together, or are they just isolated from each other as they are from the broader Christian community or world? Yeah,
so there's a bunch in there for sure.
Yeah, so she says, I'll read most of this too, honestly. This one's pretty tight. Good answer here. While planning my field work, I thought that my target groups covered all types of participants, which are significant for my research. During the interview process, I realized that adding interviewees from other Reformed churches with Dutch roots would benefit my study. Thus, one of my thesis subsections investigates the evolution of Dutch Reformed churches' approach to pluralism and openness to interfaith dialogue during the last 4 decades. inclusion of experience in the interfaith dialogue of the CRC churches of North America, the Christian Reformed that is, and the United Reformed Churches of North America, adds new perspectives and a better understanding of the broader Dutch Calvinist vision of interfaith relations. So out of her 64 interviewees total, 9 of those were members of the CRC and 2 of them were URC. Were basically interviewed for the study. Given that the research is dedicated to the Canadian Reformed community with its unique history, theology, and separate long-standing institutions, she says, I did not think it would be correct for me as an outsider to make any generalizations and project the findings on other Reformed communities. However, Mariia says she believes that the research might be of interest to other members in other Reformed denominations who might see similarities in their communities. So basically, she doesn't want to project, but there certainly could be a fair amount of similarity. And that would, again, depend on if it's, URC, probably a lot more similarity, and even the CRC to a large extent as well. So,
yeah.
That's kind of that point.
And most of it was in Ontario too. So the relationships even between the different federations in different areas might be different too.
Yeah,
so that's partly why, she didn't want to speculate against all over. So
honestly, like the listeners, like wherever you're from, we'll be able to answer that question better just hearing what she pulled out of the CanRC churches. If you're a URC listener or a CRC or whatever, FRC, whatever particular federation you're from, or any of the Australian churches, shout out to, I know we have a few Australian listeners too.
Oh yeah.
Which is kind of neat.
I think this question came out of BC, but what was I going to say? Yeah, I think when studying the CanRC, she came at it from like a pretty historical standpoint too, right? So she like followed our trail. That's kind of how she got here, she said, right? I think she said she followed Kuiper here.
Yeah.
And that, so John Calvin to Kuiper and Kuiper to, the CanRC churches. So I guess the path to get to some of these other denominations is different. So it's hard to say if everything here applies, but, and I guess that's why she doesn't want to, say it, but take it for what it's worth. I think it's, her research is going to be applicable to a lot of people.
For sure.
Especially those ones that are still Dutch churches, right? Like a lot of URC churches are still primarily, I think, a Dutch Reformed church.
Yep. Totally. There's definitely a fair amount of similarities there.
So maybe it's like more criticisms are going to take out of it than positive.
It depends on your perspective, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. On to the next question here. I'll just read this verbatim. Towards the end of the podcast, Mariia envisioned increased diversity for schools, like it is emerging for the churches. And what she missed completely was the need to look at the underlying foundations, the Christian principles that uphold the community. Increased diversity may be good, but it can also lead to increased division, developing stereotypes, which Mariia is very aware of, and community breakdown. So Mariia says, fair point, she recognizes this. And this obviously highlights the tensions and disagreements in the community and how people approach Christian education in schools, and how and whether certain topics should be taught. While being aware that this is obviously a generalization, participants that she had in her study observed very clearly the difference between rural and urban churches, and that also gets mirrored in the school as well. And she included a quote from one of her people who were interviewed that demonstrates that point exactly. And then she goes on to say, I agree members of the community strongly aim to work together to ensure certain consistency of approaches and also staying faithful to the underlying foundations. For example, in the Canadian Reformed schools, children from more progressive urban churches and more conservative rural churches meet in one classroom. A good example of that is obviously Guido. In this situation, it is often very hard, the interviewees told Mariia, to find a happy medium or middle ground. And this is a quote from the study from one of her interviewees. It says, I saw this conflict between the different opinions when urban people wanted to be more open-minded and the other half were more conservative. So there were a lot of tensions about that. How do you teach sex ed, for example? How do you teach art? How do you teach music when half of your class is more in touch with secular society, whereas the other half is not? And that's, again, a quote from an interviewee. But the leadership of the parents ends up being, quote, a beautiful balance, says another respondent in the study, because parents have to work together to have their views heard and understood. They might represent various sides of the spectrum in the CanRef, viewpoints. And then another quote here again from another person interviewed in the study. People who are insular and protective of the Reformed worldview have a different way of doing things than people who feel that worldview should be spread far and wide, and they need to work together. People in the middle work to facilitate the discussion, and it is working well because both sides need to be balanced. And a board chair is a key person to do that, to balance those tensions that would come up in a school where you have a diverse range of understandings of what should be happening. The principal is another balancer because he is one who generally will have to talk to students and deal with a lot of parents one-on-one. That's a quote from an interviewee that Mariia had. So she goes on to make a final comment on this herself. She says, I believe that some level of diversification is inevitable. Recently, the Canadian Reformed community has demonstrated social and political pluralism while standing differently on certain issues such as diversity of student population and religious schooling, the role of women in the community, and voting for different parties across the political spectrum.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer too. So,
basically, the diversity is inevitable. It's here already. And I think it probably will keep growing as the world's getting increasingly diverse. And I don't mean like ethnically so much as just
definitely our context,
opinions.
Right? Maybe she goes on to do this later, but she said, I think she said in the interview or in the podcast that she said possibly the student body will become a more open idea but the teachers will be still guarded as Reformed or
Candidacy or URC or something.
Which is, I thought was interesting. Like that's definitely like if you're leaning that way, that's probably the way you'd think it would go. I'm curious about this though. Like from she mentions the urban rural. Like we've talked about that before too.
Yep.
We chatted about that with Mike, and the difference between like conservative and liberal mindsets and personality types and stuff. You definitely see that in here in some of these quotes and comments and stuff. You definitely see that's alive. That's something that people are, not necessarily struggling with, but definitely something that they're contending with when they come across issues like this. So,
yeah, there's always a healthy tension there, no matter what the issue is, really, church related or school related.
So always. To her point though, because I think her thesis was about how we prepare graduates for graduands.
Graduands, they always like
graduands
to say.
For life outside of or not outside our community, but out past high school age, into post-secondary and then into their life, being integrated into a pluralistic society. I think like if you take this approach of like having, what she's describing here is like a pretty balanced view where we're taking both the conservative and liberal ways of looking at the student body, that it becomes kind of a good transition between your local elementary school and then like the post-secondary, like secular post-secondary school. It kind of brings in the next like element for say somebody who's like, a little bit more sheltered.
Sure. Yeah.
That's me. I was like,
sure.
The little sheltered kid. But like, yeah, I think that's probably good.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I mean, people can make their own. We can continue to struggle with that.
The feedback is ongoing for sure.
Yeah.
All right, we'll jump into the next question here because there's a fair amount of feedback to get through still. We'll make this succinct enough that people will listen to it. So another listener wrote in, a younger listener, saying, I was really curious if she found that people really knew why the Canadian Reformed exist, i.e. the theological roots of our federation. She mentioned that Klaas Schilder is a huge figure in the history of our church, but I find most people our age don't know who he is or why we started our own churches back in the 1940s in Canada instead of joining the CRC, which was a fairly faithful denomination at the time. So I guess the question is, do people you interviewed know why the Canadian Reformed exist as compared to other federations, and do they think it's for a good reason? So Mariia,
I'm assuming the person's our age, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. As a younger listener, I believe. So
I group myself in there with the young crowd.
Yeah, we could like tell people who these people are, but I'm not sure if they're comfortable with that. So yeah, just for going forward, if people write in, if you want to be given a shout out or something, let us know. We're happy to do that.
Yeah, there you go. We just put your name in here.
Yeah,
and have you on as the next guest.
Yeah,
like exactly. I don't know. Like if from this question, I don't think whatever we're doing this podcast, I don't think I could I couldn't tell you what these, how Klaus Skilder was like, the major figure. I couldn't really tell you like how he differed like in a nuanced way from other people.
Yeah.
Even though I know like, maybe some things about why we are a federation, but
yeah. Well, Mariia gave a pretty substantial answer on this one. I will probably flip it directly to the listener who sent in the question, but for the sake of the podcast and for time, I will summarize. So Mariia writes back to say, I did not ask a question about the church, but I asked questions about the reasons for establishing and the establishment and preservation of separate schools, theological aspects and the parents' baptismal promise, as well as the Dutch Reformed habit of having parallel systems of institutions, and a couple other factors influenced the decision to create and maintain their own schools, along with the fact that the evolution of other Christian schooling towards becoming more interdenominational was not seen as the right pathway by the Canadian Reformed people.
Yeah. And she talked about like the triangle of like in the podcast. Like it was like home, church, school, and that's actually funny.
It wasn't going that way.
That was amazing. I heard that a lot more as kids than I have in recent years. But like that triangle, the triangle of our Reformed churches. So, and I think that would probably be like the reason why they were like, no, we need our own thing.
Yeah, they were concerned about the direction of the schools already back then, which is some definite foresight there for sure. Then she goes on to talk about Skilder, and the disagreements between Skilder and Kuiper, and basically saying that almost nobody she interviewed could tell her the differences between that.
No, even though she probably knew. Like, well, she did know. She was
our people,
she knew all the stuff going in.
Yeah, people in our circles don't know. Like, I could not tell you the nuances.
We need to get a historian on the podcast to fill us in, because like a lot of this, like I don't know if we're like embarrassed by it. Like the history from Holland to here is something that we don't really think about a lot. Maybe because we're like pretty close to it still, but we should really know why, and the specifics behind the men who were preaching certain things and why we split.
Yeah. It's in the pipeline. We'll definitely do a church history episode one of these days.
Add her to the list.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that. So that, basically more of that answer just goes on to explain the split and whatnot. But if people are interested, let us know. We can just post these answers somewhere actually, and people can just read them themselves if they prefer to not hear us read them for the most part.
Fair enough.
So let us know. Just send us a quick message if you want that. Okay, so moving on to another question here. So tied in with that, I wonder if she senses more ecumenical growing in our circles. Can't talk today. Groups like ARPA and others have created working and respectful relationships with other Reformed Christians in a way that didn't even exist just 20 years ago. Does Mariia see and does she sense an appetite for more federational unity, or do people want to kind of maintain their canarsie distinctiveness? So Mariia goes on to once again give a very long and thorough answer. But if you want to summarize that, I've been talking about. Do you want to take a crack at that, Ty?
I mean, we touched on this a bit too, the distinctiveness aspect of it in previous questions, but the Canadian Reformed schools are usually open only to the members of our churches, so she studied the schools, but I guess a lot of these questions are aimed at the churches. And then she basically goes on to say, like, we have wider spread awareness of projects like ARPA, Cardis, some of these like think tanks and stuff like that. But we don't really have any specific figures. Like she mentioned Jonathan Van Maren, who's a Netherlands Reformed church member. Yeah. He's like, probably people know his name. He's from this, he's from
CCBR, pro-life activist.
Yeah, so he's like doing all sorts of stuff, and then he had like talks about the danger of pornography in Canadian Reformed schools. In Canadian Reformed schools even. So, like we don't really have figures like that necessarily, but then we are working at like
there's
a little more engagement and coordination.
There's coordination on a higher level in terms of these larger groups like an ARPA, like a Cardis, like a CCBR, but less so locally. It was her kind of analysis if I were to summarize it like that.
Her last part here is pretty interesting though. She said, furthermore, several respondents mentioned the Canadian Reformed community's self-centeredness is a serious barrier that the church and its members should recognize and start addressing. An interest to be exposed to the diversity of views and perspectives is growing, and it is used is used as one of the arguments by those who think the King Reformed schools should be open to children of the Christian communities. So basically, are we too self-centered? Are we not as integrated into the broader Christian context as we should be, or into other communities? So it gets back into like the argument of, conservative versus liberal, open the schools, don't open the schools kind of.
Yeah, that's definitely a real nerve within the community. So she hit on that quite well. She knows where the pressure points are.
Yep.
And
I'm sure as she went, she was like, I'm going to ask them this, and that'll really get them going.
Yeah, I bet.
But, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll file that one away for further discussion. That's always a good topic there in terms of schools and whatnot.
And then, 20 years from now, maybe we'll fly out to Russia and interview again.
Yeah, and just drive up to Ottawa. So, okay. There was one other error. She just wanted to correct the record on that. At one point, she talks about the Canada churches of having a membership of 10,000. Now, if I recall it correctly, I thought she was referring to 10,000 within Ontario, which seems like a more accurate number to me. But if people heard that as 10,000 for the Federation, the actual number is somewhere between 18 and 19. I have a reference here that Mariia provided out of the 2018 yearbook, and it says more than 19,000 is the number. So if any aspiring listeners or hardworking listeners want to write in, do some of the research and find the exact number, feel free, and we'll share that. But it's somewhere in and around the 18, 19, 20,000 mark, somewhere in there.
Yep.
I'll give myself a 2,000 range.
Yeah,
so
I'm not too worried
hopefully
about
I'm right. Yeah.
It's somewhere between 10 and 50.
Yeah, it's in the high teens to 20. So that's where we're at. That's just a minor factual update there for you. She also said she was referenced Ajax instead of Scarborough, so she wanted to make that clear. She meant to say
horrible
Scarborough, which she's from Ottawa. We'll forgive her for that. Yeah, not getting her GTA terminology exactly correct.
Yeah, I don't really know what the difference is. So
yeah,
it was great. I'm really glad she actually made the trip. I don't know if everyone caught that. She made the trip from Ottawa that day with
her and her husband.
Came all the way down from Ottawa just to come on our pod and came to our studio. So that was awesome. So we didn't have a Zoom call, and we got to meet her. So it was amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I guess maybe just to sum it up, she sees, there's a lot of change, a lot of things going on in the community. It's alive and well. There is an increased amount of different opinions and perspectives. There's definitely hotspots, especially on the education file, in terms of whether or not to open up schools to more kids. Yeah. But there also is a healthy balance, I think, as well.
And overall, so this is all feedback questions from our listeners, and admittedly, like most of these questions are trying to get at some of the pain points. They're like, "Hey, what about this?" But like when we talk to her, usually these are episodes like we get to talk about what the guest said after they were the guest,
which is always great.
Oh, dude, like they're so good after the cameras go off and the mics shut off, right? But overall, she was very not necessarily surprised, but like she really appreciated how our community was like still a thing, like after so many years, and like the ability of our churches and schools to retain membership of the kids. Yeah. And I don't think she in any way like made that seem like it was like, well, you just indoctrinate your kids and they're just like blindly following along, right? Like,
no, she praised the critical thinking, actually.
Yeah, like
quite a bit.
You're bringing your kids up in a faith that's not like ungrounded, but then also like, these kids are like really well integrated once they get out of here. So, and of course she didn't want to give her paper away, but but so it struck me as like extremely positive. So
overall. And also just she's stressed this again and again, but just how open people were just to be interviewed and to talk, and very again, as the response to this podcast obviously indicates people are interested in the results and interested in taking a look in the mirror and seeing, okay, what are we about as a federation? What do we have to work on, and what have we done right in the past?
That's a really positive thing about our
that's healthy
to be said. Yeah, that's super healthy. Yeah, that shows a real critical mind, like a real like being able to actually have a conversation about yourself and being willing to like accept the weaknesses that are presented to you. Like, I think that's a good thing.
It's and not to beat this drum too much again, but on the conservative liberal side of things, but yeah, we have to be careful. On the one hand, we can be thankful for what we have achieved. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, look to change, and look to improve. Mm-hmm. Like we shouldn't carelessly, denigrate the social institutions that, our forefathers and whatnot have. So I would say for the most part,
we should get into that on a Mike episode.
Carefully made.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like there's room to question existing structures and room to make change.
Oh, I know where you pulled that from. It's Jordan Peterson's new book.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah,
don't
definitely
needlessly denigrate the institutions that others have created or something.
Yeah,
that's got to be one of the rules, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's rule 1 there. But it's a good rule, man. But also, keep an eye on creative achievement. There's a lot of value there too, and a lot of room for change. And so have a balance, have the conversation, which is what this platform is for. Yeah.
And, and we're going through a new psalm book. That's like a new thing in our churches.
True.
Have you been doing that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Our churches are working through it. So far, I've heard no one say anything bad about it. So maybe that's yet to come. Maybe they're saving it all for like the last minute before we.
People will write in. Yeah.
But I think it's really good. Really good move.
So. All right. Well, I think that ends it off on a fairly positive note.
There you go.
Once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
If you got this far in this crazy feedback episode,
appreciate all your support. And
thanks for Jeff and Mariia. Thanks for coming on. They were both amazing, and more to come.
Yep. Check in every 2 weeks
for sure.
Talk to you soon, folks.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. You can send us your feedback by emailing us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. You can find us on social media by looking for the handle Reformed Real Talk. You can find us online by going to realtalkpodcast.ca. We look forward to your feedback, as that's what helps us grow and improve as podcasters. Real Talk is produced by myself, Lucas Holpluer, Tyler Vanderwood, and Tim Van Woudenberg. The theme music was created by Calvin Hutton. The table and cabinet behind me were made by Ethan Vanderwood of Eureka Woods. And finally, this sign in the studio was made by Zebra Signs. That's it for now, folks. Catch you next time.